Hey, I'm Chris from Make Everything, and today we're going out with the big saw and a 60-inch bar to do some slabbing. Check it out. So anytime I go out to do any slabbing work, I always bring kind of the same set of tools, anything to pull nails and staples. I bring an aluminum extension ladder, which allows me to give myself a reference surface. I bring a bunch of kind of longer TimberTech screws and some just random blocks of wood in order to attach everything together. Now, a lot of people ask what the ladder is for. Now, the ladder is in order for me to get a good reference cut for that first top cut that we make. The ladder is going to be nice and flat. I'm going to check it and make sure that it's not twisted and that it's totally parallel. And then the guide bar is actually going to run across that, make the top cut, and then the rest of the cuts will make without the ladder. Some guys like to leave the ladder on for all the cuts. I like to just kind of take it off after this one. And that other piece of steel that I attach to the end is something for me to hook my winch up to on the milling attachment. Now, I had just upgraded this milling attachment with that extra oiler and the winch setup, and it turns out that I wind up not really using the winch that much, but that little bar that sticks out the end of the log is just for me to hook the rope up to so that I can screw down to it and I don't need to, screw off to another tree or anything, across the yard. Now, I'm using a 60-inch bar that I got off of one of my old saws here, and I just recently did a video where I kind of modified this to make it work on my Husqvarna saw. And I always bring a electric driver whenever I go to do a slabbing job, just because it makes it so much faster tightening and loosening bolts than trying to get in there with a ratchet. And it doesn't over tighten anything, but you always got to bring a couple extra bolts just in case. Now, I built this bar. It was actually one of my first videos. It was my first video building a version of this, and this is kind of a better version of that. And I'm going to be doing a video soon where I kind of show off this thing and kind of share some of the features. I figured out a bunch of kind of design changes that I could make that make this thing work a lot better. So I set the depth, and now I have to compensate for the thickness of the ladder, and I'm able to set my auxiliary oiler up and get in to make my first cut. What's nice about using the ladder is that I can kind of hang the saw on it in order for me to get that first cut to start in the log. And it's got that helper handle on the front, which is good too. It protects the other operator, if there is one, from getting hit with a chain if it were to snap or come off. And I pretty much immediately started having trouble with the winch. It was just kind of taking too much out of the saw. This hard-nosed bar was already pretty difficult to pass through this log, and I had just sharpened my chain, but even still I had a little bit of trouble. So the winch wound up really not being super helpful, and eventually I just take it off. And here's a quick tip: make sure you have enough fuel to make the whole cut in your saw before you start, otherwise you've got to stop and put more gas in. I'm also always filling my bar oil anytime I add fuel, because this saw has an extra bar oil button, which just multiplies the output of oil when you're running a big bar like this, which can be really helpful to keep the saw from overheating and keep that chain from getting too hot. Now I'll be able to finish this cut. Now this tree is like 44 inches at its widest, and this is really where you need kind of like this really large chainsaw bar. If you were to look at this tree, you'd think you could accomplish this with like a 42-inch bar or something like that, but when you get to that really wide spot, anything smaller than like a 60-inch bar just isn't going to do it. And that's really kind of one of the nicest features of this tree, is where you've got that crotch of branches that's spread out. It's where you're going to get the most dynamic grain and the most interesting wood. We're able to slide that top cut off, roll it over. Still got a couple of nails and screws in it that I can bang out, and then we can get into the actual milling of boards. Now, one of the things I always like to do is make sure my chain is super sharp. Now, I'm using this Pferd chainsaw sharpener, which does the tooth and the raker in one shot. It's a really great chain sharpener. There's a couple other brands that make similar ones. I know Wrangler Star did a video on it, but I'll put a link to the Pferd one in the description of this video. You can check it out. And I always bring these little blocks, and the blocks are labeled with a thickness on them. And these blocks will help me set the saw for the slab thickness that I want. Now these are 2 3/4, and I like 2 3/4 as a thickness of slab because it gives me about a 1/4 inch that I can mill off square if I want to go back and, you know, plane or router sled a slab flat. I'm not too close to that 2.5 inch thickness, which is a really nice thickness to start with. Now after the chain's sharp, getting the saw set back up in the milling attachment so that I can cut this second slab. And don't worry, for all the safety people out there, I've got the chaps on, I've got ear protection, I've got gloves, got glasses on, and I've even got a face mask on. This chain is whipping around pretty fast, so you want to make sure you protect your thighs just in case that thing comes off and gets you in the leg. Now I was moving through this log pretty quickly at this point. Things were going pretty well, saw was running well. And I had scanned this log for nails, just visually and also with a little metal detector. But not well enough to not find this one. I just hit a nail. I can hear the difference in my saw. And that pretty much does it for this chain on this day. What we decided to do was take my smaller saw and cut perpendicular across the log to pull the slab off so that we could inspect what happened. And there you can see the nail. I was so close to missing it, but unfortunately hit it and kind of ran through it enough where I basically destroyed the grind on that chain.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
And you know what's the worst is that had I gone a 1/2 inch deeper,
You would have missed it.
would have just missed it.
All right, so abruptly we are back in the shop. Now, I put out a video a couple weeks ago of fixing this bar. This is the 60-inch hard nose bar that had come off of an older home light saw, and I made it work. I was really excited to use it, and it just doesn't make the chain's path easy enough to use. It does work, and I did. Obviously, you just saw me cut like 1.5 slabs with it until I hit that nail. But I noticed that a lot of smoke is still coming off the nose. I've got a supplemental oiler on there, and it's just not doing it. And then I also noticed that if I make the chain just a little too tight, when I pull the throttle, my clutch starts to smoke, which basically means that the clutch can't engage, the clutch pads can't spin it, and the chain just won't move. So I said, you know what, I'm putting too much time and energy into this to have the wrong tools, and I went out and I bought a brand new 62-inch roller nose bar. So you can see these little sprocket here on the nose. Now this is a more modern bar. It's also a lot slimmer. It uses actually a little bit shorter of a chain, even though it's 2 inches longer, and I can replace this roller by knocking out this pin. Now this bar works way better. So let's get back a week later and see how this one does on the slabs. So now a week later, back on site, another beautiful day here. You can see where I stopped the other day, and I can get in with this new bar, and immediately this thing is just ripping through the material. It's cutting super well, saw's running great, and one of the things you'll notice right away is there's no smoke coming off the nose of this bar. The last bar, as it whipped around that, basically 180-degree turn, was smoking up just because it was running so hot. So this thing cuts super nice. I can throw my wedge in there as I kind of finish up this half slab. And that's how it's supposed to go. I'm supposed to be able to rip through these things pretty quickly. So it was a little refreshing to have it go very well once I came back with the new bar. Now pushing through this next slab, again, went really well. You can see that wide spot. I kind of like twist the saw a little bit so I'm cutting, I'm not getting that full width of the log engaging with the teeth at any moment. I want to make sure that the saw has a little bit of room to breathe, and I'm listening very carefully to the way the saw is running so that I don't feel like it's being bogged down too heavily. And each one of these slabs is probably about 200 to 250 pounds. They're 2 3/4 inches thick, and I think they're about 11 feet long. Now, the tree guys that had felled this tree had kind of knocked it down onto those rocks, which was great for the first couple of cuts, but now it had gotten so low that my saw head would hit that rock. So I grabbed a 2x4 and this chunk of wood and essentially just like wedged it up to try to lift it up onto those rocks a little higher. I wedged a log underneath it, and now I've got another kind of good setup for another slab. Now, cutting downhill like this, it doesn't seem like it would make that big of a difference because it's such a mellow angle, but it really does help a lot with just, sort of the path of the saw. I don't have to push as hard. The saw naturally wants to kind of fall in that direction. And if you go online and research chainsaw milling, you'll see a lot of guys that intentionally knock their trees down on this, extreme angle so that when they mill them, it's just that much easier than pushing, either uphill, obviously, which would be harder, or just even on a flat surface. This slab went really well also, and I'm getting to kind of the widest part of that tree, popping through the other side. These slab cuts take about 15 minutes, which is how much they should take.
Yeah, come on.
Wow.
Does it get much better than that?
No, I mean, that is stunning. Jesus.
So luckily, the way I had it set up, I was able to even get one more slab before having to move the log another time. Now, pushing this through on my own is definitely not as easy as having a second person there, but by rocking the saw in that way, it does make it, manageable to get through these slabs. And like I said, it takes about 15 minutes to cut each one. And you can see there's just sort of a little bit of rot in the middle there, kind of some dirt from, maybe there was an inclusion as the tree kind of grew, or a branch that had been cut off. But this material is gorgeous. This is beech, and this is a really old tree that had been here for a very long time. Now I'm in a spot where I can't get another slab out of it without hitting those rocks. So I grab the 2x4 and just sort of figure out where I can go with this. At this point, the tree is not that heavy. I mean, it's probably still, 400, 500 pounds, but I can easily move it with that 2x4 and spin it around. And if you had two people there, you probably could roll it if you wanted to try to roll it down that hill. But this was a good enough setup for me to try and make what would be the last slab cut before I wound up with, sort of a bottom face cut. And at this point, even pulling the saw seemed a little bit weird. I don't know, it sounded different, but I figured I would try and get through this anyway. And I I hadn't sharpened my chain before I did this. My chain was definitely getting dull. I could feel it. And in my head, I was thinking, once I get through this last one, I'm going to sharpen my chain and let the saw cool down. But I didn't get that lucky. The saw shuts off, and that's about it. The saw just abruptly died, and as soon as it happened, I knew something bad was going on. I spent some time trying to pull it. Eventually, I wedged the log open, and I slid the saw out. I checked the spark plug. I checked the carburetor. I checked fuel. I made sure I wasn't flooded. Sometimes saws don't like to start on their side, so I stood it up normal. I did everything I could in the field, and eventually realized that there was nothing I could do. Stuck my flashlight in there where the spark plug was, and realized that the saw was done. All right, so we're back at the shop. The saw head has self-destructed. This is not the first time this has happened. I have done this before on a similar sized piece of material, but the first time I did it, I was using that hard nose bar that I replaced, and I got the roller nose bar. Now, I tried to use the roller nose bar on this one too, and I think I might have done some damage to the piston and cylinder. So what's happening here is I took the exhaust off already, but basically on the exhaust port side of the cylinder, it's totally scored up and destroyed. It's melted pretty much. And it's the exact same symptoms as the first cylinder head that I blew up. So I looked around a little bit online, and from what I found is I'm running 50-to-1, mix it myself, gas to oil mixture, and I wasn't really running any like high performance, anything. Like I was using 91 octane gas and just regular off the shelf oil mix. So I'm realizing that for this type of saw, for the type of work that I'm asking it to do, I really need to use a more like kind of high performance mix, because I'm just putting the saw under so much pressure, and I really need to like help lubricate the cylinder and piston. So I bought a new head, actually 2 new heads, and these are a coated head and cylinder. So I got these. I'm going to put one in the saw, and I'm going to keep one just as a backup, and we'll get the saw rebuilt, get back to work. So there's actually a video on my channel of me rebuilding this saw once, and I kind of hoped that it would just never have to be done again. But the piston and cylinders are pretty inexpensive. They're under $100, and it's really not that much work. Plus, it just helps me kind of understand why something is breaking, right? Like, yes, it's a time loss and it's a dollars loss, and that kind of sucks. But if I can expand my understanding into small gas engines like this, it's just one more kind of tool that I can put in the toolkit, and knowledge base that will help me in the future, I'm sure. So anyway, that job was going really well. The slabs were beautiful, and I was having a great day up until that moment when things kind of went awry. But that's kind of part of doing this sort of work. There are always going to be problems, and you just have to figure out a way to overcome them. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. That is the abrupt end to my chainsaw milling in this segment, but I'll be back doing more. So if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to leave a comment down below. Maybe you have some information about this saw. It's a Husqvarna 3120 XP, and maybe you've blown the head on the exhaust side a few times, and you can give me some tips. I'm open for it. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the dialogue that kind of goes on in the comments of people sharing information. I'm sure a lot of you are just going to tell me that I'm an idiot for blowing up a $2,000 saw head twice, but such is life. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this, and if you follow me here on Instagram at @MakeEverythingShop, I showed a bunch of kind of footage the day of when this was happening, and I basically film every day showing you what I'm doing in the shop and out in the field, and I like to answer a lot of questions through my messages, and it's a great way to kind of interact and kind of figure out what's going on a day-to-day basis here in the shop. That's about it. I'm Chris at for Make Everything. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks.